All right, today we are going to begin looking at paragraph 47, which is Christ's authority over men, which covers Matthew 9, 9 to 13, Mark 2, 13 to 17, and Luke 5, 27 to 32. First question is, number 167, whom does Jesus call to be a follower? Who is it? Matthew. Any question? Number 168, what is his Hebrew name? Sam. Levi. Any question? Number 169, what is his occupation? Griff.
Tax collector.
Right. 170. There were two kinds of tax collectors. Did I have you do this one? Oh, did I say research?
Yeah.
Okay. So, anybody find the two kinds of tax collectors? Jonas?
Just the tax collector and the publican.
Publican?
Publican.
Might be the same thing.
Oh.
Publican is just another name for tax collector. But there's two kinds of tax collectors. Did you find, Joel?
I like tax collectors and there's tax farmers.
What was the last one?
Tax farmers.
Farmers?
Yeah.
What's a tax farmer?
And under.
I never heard that expression, so I'm not sure what that is. Did you read what it meant?
I did, but I didn't write that out.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. Anybody else?
These are probably both Hebrew words, and I'm going to pronounce them really wrong. But Gabriel and Mecca?
I have no idea. Those must be the Aramaic or Hebrew words for the two different. What do those mean? I don't know those terms.
Well, I have one website that I found here. And I didn't write down what the one starts with the G is, but the one with the ends is anything that traveled on the road.
Okay. How do you spell the one with a G?
G-A-B-B-A-I.
Goodbye. Goodbye. That's what you say to your money when the tax collector comes by. Goodbye. I'm not sure if that's what this means or not, but one type of tax was income tax. All right, so write this down. One type was income tax, and we'll give you a bonus point just for finding those words. Noel. And the second one was what I think it was Noel said or somebody else, that whatever is traveling, in other words, is customs, or it's taxes on goods that are moving. Those are called customs. Maybe you're familiar with that word in relationship to being outside our country and coming in. You have to go through customs. They want to know what you bought other places and you're bringing into the country, things like that. Okay, got it? So there's income tax collectors, and there are those that collect taxes on goods that are passing by. So in other words, they would sit out by a trade route, maybe, or in a market, and they would tax anybody that was bringing goods down the road. Any questions about the two? Now, which one do you think? Well, you wouldn't have any basis maybe to know this, but what do you think would be the one that people would hate most?
Income.
You would think maybe income tax, but they were so accustomed to that they didn't really think as negatively about that as they did if you're bringing goods from one place to another. You never knew where there might be a tax collector that's going to collect taxes from you, and it might happen over and over again. So actually the customs officials were the worst of the two. And can you tell by what it says in, let's see, is it in Matthew or Mark? Let's see, Matthew 9:9 and Mark 2:13 and 14. Can you tell which kind of tax collector was Matthew? Anybody figure it out?
Incomes.
Why?
I don't know.
Customs.
Why?
That's not income.
I didn't say it wasn't income.
Nice.
Yes,
I just asked why.
Nice.
Noel?
Customs because he's sitting by the side of the road in the booth.
Yeah, he's sitting by the side of the road in a booth. You don't do that if you're collecting income. You go to their houses, maybe, or they have to come to you. All right, so he's a customs tax collector. Now, just some other things about taxes. Roman citizens did not have to pay taxes. So they ran the empire on taxes they collected from everybody else. And from the other people, subject peoples, tax collectors were awarded the position based on bids. In other words, they didn't just go, they didn't put an ad in the paper, tax collector wanted. People would put in a bid. So let's say Luke wants to be a tax collector and Nate wants to be a tax collector. They come to the local governor, let's say that's Griff, and so they basically offer him money in order to be the next tax collector. So who are you going to give the job to between these two?
Nate.
Why?
I like Nate.
You're kind of quick with that.
Yeah. Whoever,
Now they're both offering you money.
yeah, whoever pays me more.
Whoever pays you more, right? Well, and why would you offer him money to be a tax collector? Because you get more money. You can, because what? When you're collecting taxes, the Roman government simply says, here's the amount we expect, but if you charge anything more than that, Rome doesn't care if you overcharge, and whatever you charge more, you get to keep yourself. So it would be a good money-making proposition to be a tax collector. Tax collectors became wealthy. Interesting that when you find the words tax collector, when it's used by the Pharisees, it's always connected with what kind of people?
Liars and cheaters.
Liars, cheats, sinners, and prostitutes. So they lumped tax collectors in the same category as prostitutes. That's how the Pharisees thought about them. Why? Well, because they're working for a foreign government against their own people. And not only that, but they're fleecing their own people. They're overcharging their own people to become wealthy themselves. And so these were people that were definitely looked down upon by the Pharisees and people in general. All right, number 171. Who ate with Jesus and his disciples? What are we told here? Marissa?
The collectors and some.
Right, tax collectors and sinners. Any question? 172. Who was upset by this? Sean?
Pharisees.
Right, the Pharisees. And remember, what do we know about the Pharisees? What's their main deal? What do we remember about them? Oh, come on, we got to keep these people straight. We're going to come across them again and again. You got to know who they are. Who are the Pharisees?
The religious people, like the teachers.
Okay, they were teachers. They were hypocrites. Why?
They said one thing but the other.
What did they say?
Don't sin, but then they sin.
A little more to it than that. What did they say? What did they teach the people that they didn't keep themselves? Obedience to the law of God and all the rules that they had added to it. They were legalists. They believed in that they would get to God by keeping all these rules and regulations, but they were hypocritical in that they found ways to get around them whenever they could. All right, so they're looking down. They look down on tax collectors and sinners. So they're upset by the fact that Jesus and his disciples are hanging around with him. 173. This is interesting. To whom did they complain? Joel?
Jesus' disciples.
The disciples. Why do you suppose they didn't complain to Jesus? Any speculation? Well, what do we have a tendency to do as human beings? If we have a problem with somebody, quite often we don't go to that person, do we? We go to other people and complain about that person. So that's just kind of the natural tendency of human beings. Had they had any interactions with Jesus before that might affect how they, or their reluctance to approach him here? What might they expect from Jesus if they went to him and complained? A good answer? Or maybe a question? If you remember back in last year's Bible class, and we did the charting of in Mark 11 and 12, every time they'd ask him a question, he would respond with a question. So at any rate, for whatever reason, they didn't go directly to Jesus. Went to his disciples. 174, Jesus responds to his critics with two statements. The first compares himself to what? Haley?
Physician?
A physician, which is another word for doctor, medical doctor, right? All right, 175, I asked you to evaluate his first statement. What's he saying there? Luke?
Sinners are like the sick, they need a physician. The physician is Jesus. He wants to help those who want his help.
Okay, good. Anybody else? All right, so a physician doesn't go to well people. He goes to people that need his services. Okay, it looks like Luke's the only one that has an answer there, so Luke gets a bonus point. The rest of you don't count that. 176, evaluate his second statement. What's he saying here? Anybody? Jordan?
He's not coming to like preach to the people who already know who he is. He's coming to preach to those who need him and don't know who he is.
Okay, I think, let's see, maybe, I think I included that with the physician. Is there a particular statement you were thinking of there?
That last part where I came not to call the righteous but sinners.
Okay, I guess I need to be more clear on my question. I was thinking about when he said, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Oh, okay, but then for I came not to call the righteous but sinners. Okay, so that does fit that last statement. I was thinking more of the first part of that. Anybody address or can think now, what's he mean when he says, go and learn what this means? I desire mercy and not sacrifice. What's he mean there when he says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice?
Like he doesn't just want the sacrifices out of like duty. He wants actual like repentance from them.
Right, exactly. Very good. Did you have that down?
Yeah.
Did you write that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Give yourself a bonus point. That's exactly right. Because and that's a problem with legalism. If you look at religion or at serving God as being keeping a list of things that you have to do or things that you can't do, if that's what you're looking at, eventually that's all you're going to look at, and you're going to evaluate yourself based on the list. But your heart might not be right. It's not that hard to keep a list. Lots of people do it. There are lots of people in all kinds of churches that are keeping religious rites or practices. They're doing the right thing every Sunday, whatever. They're going along with everything, but their heart is really not right with God. And that was true of these guys. There were times when they did things that were really not being nice to other people, but they kept the list. And so Jesus is pointing this out to them, that, and this is something that's in the Old Testament too. I mean, remember when King Saul disobeyed God and offered a sacrifice before going into battle because Samuel, the priest, hadn't gotten there. Samuel was supposed to get there to offer a sacrifice to God, and he didn't show up on time, and so Saul got impatient, and he offered a sacrifice instead. Do you remember what happened? What did Saul say to him? He said, to obey is better than sacrifice. And to listen is better than the fat of rams. It's better to obey than to go through religious practices, whatever it is. And Jesus is saying the same thing here. Any comments or questions? Anybody else have an answer they think counts as a bonus on this one? All right, Jordan, with your explanation, we'll take that too. One. Okay. Oh, now we're ready for paragraph 48, right? Can we do that one? All right. Paragraph 148 is Christ's authority over tradition. Matthew 9:14-17, Mark 2:18-22, and Luke 5:33-39. Tradition. Number 177. What did John's disciples complain that Jesus' disciples were not doing? Amelia. Fasting, right. That's a religious practice, right? And so John's disciples were doing it. John had done it. And so they're seeing Jesus' disciples are not fasting. And they say, what's up with this? How come you guys aren't doing the same thing we are? Why aren't you depriving yourself as we are? Well, what was fasting like? Everybody knows what it means to fast, right? No? Somebody say no? You didn't say no? All right, so the Pharisees especially really made a deal out of this. Let me ask you this: have any of you ever fasted for a day? All right, difficult? Yeah, it is. I don't think I've ever gotten past a day, maybe a little more than a day. But I know people that have fasted for like 30 days. How in the world they do? They say that after the first couple of days it's easier, but I don't know. I have a hard time thinking, getting past one meal before I start thinking about the next one, let alone not eating at all. But anyway, that's my problem, as you can probably tell. But the Pharisees, they came up with a whole system. There were certain fast days that were required, like the holidays, like Yom Kippur, things like that. It was everybody in Israel was supposed to fast. But the Pharisees decided that they were going to be even more spiritual, and they were going to fast twice every week. So every Monday and Thursday were fast days. So every Monday, they're walking around, oh, I'm so spiritual because I'm not eating all day today. And the same thing would happen on Thursdays. Well, apparently, John's disciples were following the Pharisaic traditions in addition to what John the Baptist had been teaching them. And so they're seeing that Jesus' disciples are not following that, and they're thinking they're not as spiritual, and yet they're following the Messiah. How can this be, right? All right, 178 then. What two things does Luke say that Jesus' disciples do in contrast to what two things that the disciples of John and the Pharisees do? Hopefully, was that clear? So two things versus two things. What do you have, Griff?
I had the disciples of Jesus eat and drink, and the disciples of John fast and pray.
Right, good. Does everybody get that? Anybody have a question? All right. This count as 1 point. Either you got it, you didn't. Number 179. In Jesus' illustration, with what does Jesus equate fasting? Hopefully this was clear. What do you have for that, Mia?
A wedding?
Not the fasting. Luke?
Mourning.
He equates fasting with mourning. How many of you got that? Okay. Talk to me. Let's see. I'm not sure we can figure out why you didn't get it. But he is equating fasting with mourning. All right, if you got that, I guess we'll give you a bonus point. Number 180, in Jesus' illustration, who are the wedding guests? Who are the wedding guests? Zach?
Jesus' disciples.
Right. Any question there? And number 181, in Jesus' illustration, who is the bridegroom? Caleb?
Christ himself.
Right. Any question? Number 182, then analyze. How does this illustration answer the objection about fasting? Anybody think they've got the idea here? Luke?
You don't fast at a wedding.
You don't fast at a wedding. So Jesus' disciples are like the people that are invited to a wedding, and Jesus is the bridegroom, and when you're invited to a wedding, you don't fast. You fast when you're mourning. I don't know if you remember in world history, we talked about that when the Jewish people were in exile in Babylon, in addition to the normal feasts and celebrations of that they were given in the Mosaic Law, they added a bunch of fasts to remember when Jerusalem was under siege, to remember when Jerusalem was destroyed, to remember the assassination of an official. These are all days of mourning and remembrance. And Jesus is pointing out that you don't do that at a wedding. And how have you ever been to a wedding reception and nobody ate anything? Doesn't happen, right? Especially around here. In this area, I think I've ever seen such lavish wedding receptions. It was before I moved here. Except one, I went to one on Long Island. And at the beginning of the reception, they didn't have you sitting at tables. They had kind of the tables you'd stand at. It was in this old mansion. And they had a guy carving turkey and another one carving beef and had all this food around, and you'd walk around and get your food and then you'd stand and eat it. And we thought, wow, this is a really nice meal. No. That wasn't the meal. That was just the appetizer part. We thought that was it. That was as good as any wedding meal we'd ever had. And then we went into the banquet hall and sat down and were given filet mignon and all kinds of other foods and stuff. It was absolutely delicious. It had to cost several hundred, probably $200 or $300 a piece, at least. Probably more than that. Would blow my mind if I even knew. So you don't mourn, you don't fast at a wedding. Okay. Number 182. In Jesus' illustration, what does he mean by when the bridegroom is taken away from them? To what is he referring there? When the bridegroom is taken away. Noah?
Jesus died.
Right. Did you get that? Now, from here, he goes into talking about cloth and wine, and I want to explain that to you. I didn't ask you questions about it because it might be difficult for you, but I think all three Gospels talk about this. And the first thing is he says you don't put a new cloth to patch an old garment. Now, we don't do that anymore. Any of your families ever patch anything? No, we just throw it away and buy a new one, right? But when I was growing up, we were a little more frugal than that. And I remember if I had a pair of jeans that I wore through the knee, it wasn't fashionable then to have holes in your jeans. If you had holes in your jeans, that was an embarrassment. You didn't actually buy them with holes in your jeans. That would have been extremely silly, because if you did, you'd have to patch them. And so nobody wanted to have holes in their pants. And so I remember you could even buy patches to put on them. Now, does anybody know what would happen if you took a piece of new cloth that had never been washed and put it on a pair of pants, let's say, that have been worn and washed many times? What happens when you put those pants in the washing machine? Does anybody know? What happens to material oftentimes when you first wash it? It shrinks. So when you put it in the washing machine, you've got this nice patch that covers the hole nicely, and you put it in a washing machine, what happens to that patch? It shrinks. Now it no longer fits very well, and it doesn't look good. So Jesus says you don't put new cloth on an old garment. Everybody knows you don't do that. And then he says you don't put new wine in an old wineskin. Now what's a wineskin? Anybody know what a wineskin is? It's a skin that holds wine.
Wow, really?
Nice.
It's that simple. It's that simple. I know, it eluded you. So they would take sometimes the stomach out of an animal, like a goat or something like that, and they would cure it and so on, and they would keep wine in that. It would be like their canteen. All right, so when as it aged, as it got older, of course it would dry more, and it would sort of get more solid than it was, because it had aged. All right, now, does anybody know what happens if you get a fresh batch of wine or grape juice and put it in a container and leave it for a while? Anybody know what happens? It's called fermentation. Are you familiar with fermentation? And when you have fermentation, the process of fermentation, which causes the wine to become more alcoholic, it also produces gas. So what would happen if you had new wine in an old wineskin that was not flexible anymore? What, John?
Break or bust.
It would break or bust. I'll tell you an illustration of this in my experience that you might find interesting. When I was in college, my freshman year, we went to, in the fall, we went to a local orchard that was selling cider. I loved apple cider, so I bought 2 jugs of apple cider, and I kept it in my room. I kept one on the shelf of my window, because I always have my window open, so it got, and I stayed cold. And I put the other one in my closet for later. All right, so these are gallon jugs. So it took me a while to drink that first gallon. But and by the time I was to the end of that, I forgot all about the one in my closet. Until one day I was sitting there at my desk and I heard, psst. What is that? And I looked in my closet, and here that gallon jug had gotten a lot bigger, because it had started to ferment, and the gases in there made the jug get bigger, and rather than explode, it simply got big enough that the cap came off and the air was escaping. So if that cap had not come off, that jug might have exploded, and I'd have had apple cider, fermented apple cider, all over everything in my closet. So that's what happens. Now, what's Jesus' point here? Those are illustrations that everybody would have understood back then. I have to explain it now because you don't patch things anymore, and you don't buy apple cider and leave it in your closet, probably like I did. What's Jesus' point? Anybody know? What Jesus is teaching is something new to them. His approach is different. And you can't take this new approach and try to fit it into the old way of doing things, the way the Pharisees had always done it. It won't work. Do you follow that? Do I need to explain that more? Does that make sense? You can't take what Jesus is teaching and try to fit it into the Pharisaical system. They're different. It won't work. You can't live your life that way because they're diametrically opposed to one another in many ways. All right, any questions? So the Pharisaic attitude is, oh, we'd always do things the way we've done it. And Jesus says, no, there's a different way. And actually, it's the way God always wanted it. It's just that you guys have perverted it. And we need to follow a new way. Okay, that takes us through everything we've done through today, I believe. So let's do section 49 for tomorrow. Section 49 for tomorrow. You have your memory verse tomorrow also. And
49 is like 20,000.
Yeah.
49 is really long.
We split it in half.
It's like a
Yeah.
page and a half.
You're just. No, it's a whole page.
How many questions are there?
It's 184 to 219. 35 questions.
I think.
No.
So yeah, I did my math wrong.
No, that's right.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that is
right.
35.
35 questions?
I'm a genius.
All right, let's do, since we have memory verse tomorrow, that takes some time too. Let's do the first 15, which would take us to what? We start at 184, is that the next one?
And then 199.
199? Okay? Is that more reasonable then?
Yeah, better is better.
Yeah.
198? Why?
Because that 199 is the 16.
Okay, up through 198.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Don't do 199, because that would be too much. Only up through 198.
I'm gonna do it. Yes, sir. Yes.